Welcome to the debate. Today we're plunging into the profound and often uncomfortable world of the Xenopoetic Codex. This is a framework that really challenges our fundamental concepts of sickness and self, reading pathology, literature, and technology, all through the highly specialized diagrammatic lens of parasitology.
And the essential tension it presents is really this. The Codex argues that a parasite doesn't just invade a body, it actively rewrites the body and its environment.
Exactly, which leads us to our central question today. Does the Xenopoetic Codex offer a genuinely new operational ontology, what it calls a surgery of boundaries that fundamentally restructures our understanding of biological reality?
Or is it primarily a powerful, specialized hermeneutic, an invaluable system of interpretation that, overlays these literary and semiotic structures onto established clinical and epidemiological facts?
Right, and my position is clear. The Codex provides a new operational schema. For me, it claims that life processes, from infection to healing, are fundamentally defined by a kind of recursive, semiotic logic. The organism isn't just invaded, it is structurally rewritten.
And I maintain that the Codex offers an invaluable hermeneutic lens, a truly powerful reading practice, the aberrant plexus, as the material calls it, that sharpens our critique. But its explanatory power remains, for me, totally dependent on traditional, situated clinical and biological evidence. It provides a compelling redescription, but it doesn't displace the material facts.
To assert that these terms are mere description, though, I think ignores the text's stated aim. When we examine the intricate diagrams, particularly the ones on psychogametous possessions, the text is explicit. These are not metaphors. They are defined as operational schema and psychogametous regulators. It's aiming for an ontological inversion where the boundary between the organism and the narrative just dissolves.
I see why you feel the urge to take the text at its most literal operational claim. But the very act of defining parasitic form in this way sort of undermines that. When the material defines helminth morphology as rhetoric, calling the parasite's cuticle revision-proof formatting, or its esophageal bulb a punctuation engine, that shows interpretation being applied to form. It's a sophisticated reading practice, not a self-contained mechanism.
But let's break down one of those core concepts to illustrate the operational claim. The placental logic processor. This is so much more than a description of two hosts interacting. The Codex defines this dual-host necessity, say, between an arthropod and a vertebrate, as a computational, temporary chorion where the parasite gestates new readabilities. What the Codex is saying is that transmission is defined not by simple material contact, but by the vector becoming a kind of gestational interface. A temporary, informational space where the parasite generates new symbolic and operational meaning.
That is a powerful definition, but the problem is that the actual diagnostic methodologies the Codex has to cite are still utterly situated in traditional biological logistics. If we need thick smears at the right hour to observe microfilarial periodicity, matching the parasite's activity to the night-biting behavior of a mosquito, or if we have to use invasive skin snips for onchocerca, well, that entire process is dictated by biology, by material location, by environmental logistics. The methodology is medium-bound.
But that reliance on the right hour or the skin snip simply reveals the points of access for the parasitic logic. It doesn't negate the operational reality of it. Look at the scar logic component. It directly challenges your notion of biological materiality being prior. SCR transcription by scar logic is defined as the process of leaving the law of its passage visible as it closes. The scar is not inert tissue. It's described as the memory device of a system that is molted and lived. It's actively generating life through thanatopoiesis, life formed by its own death or passage.
Okay, I find the concept of the scar as an active memory device compelling. But the clinical reality of intervention suggests the material constraint is always a limiting factor. The Codex observes that piperazine citrate performs a grammatical action, acting as an editorial cut that cures an essay of verbosity. That's a beautiful piece of writing, but
The success of that drug rests on chemically manipulating the host's neuromuscular syntax. The chemical manipulation happens before the semiotic interpretation. It cures the essay before the critic even arrives.
That example beautifully illustrates the chemical dimension, I'll give you that. But if we shift our focus from the drug to the symptom itself, how does your hermeneutic model account for physical signs like edema, which the Codex terms xenodiagenic edematitis? You'd argue that this is just describing inflammation, a symptom.
Exactly. I'm not convinced that the description displaces the fundamental mechanism. The underlying pathology is crucial. Take trichinella. Its effect is termed the aesthetics of generalized malaise, a perfect description. But this aesthetic is produced by the concrete material event of larval encystment in striated muscle, physically converting a myocyte into a nurse cell. The clinical process is prior. That cellular conversion is the material act that the semiotic reading then interprets. The edema is a consequence, not the principle.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The lesions are the language. They are explicitly called glossolalia coagulants and semiotic inflammations awaiting decoding. The parasite isn't just causing inflammation, it's instigating a kind of symbolic swelling. Trichomonas vaginalis illustrates this operation perfectly. Its adhesion to cells is not mere physical binding. The Codex defines it as scarb inscription. It narrates adhesion, invoking the host's symbolic swelling, the xenogenic edema, in response to an illegible touch. It uses the host's inflammation as a textual device.
But even if we accept the edema as a symbolic swelling, the material mechanism that enables it is still biochemical specificity. The material discusses the glycosylated repeats in the parasite surface proteins. If a mutant parasite loses that galactose and glucosamine content, it can't adhere anymore. The symbolic failure of scarb inscription follows the biochemical failure of the molecule. You have to admit the biology dictates the semiotic capacity there.
I think the true operational strength of the Codex lies in its macro-scale analysis, particularly how it defines prevalence as infrastructure. It forces a necessary shift away from the individual sick body to the environmental system that routes the infection. This is where mycorrhizomatic co-individuation becomes essential. It's a challenging term, but it basically means the environmental network is the disease structure.
I come at it from a different way. That insight is, well, it's epidemiological. It's grounded in concrete material conditions, not necessarily a new ontology.
But those conditions are the editor. They have agency. For instance, the Codex calls cockroaches the infrastructural underreader, acting as mechanical couriers for Giardia cysts. And the path of leptospirosis, routing through floods in urban villas Miseria, is explicitly read as an editorial decision enacted by infrastructure. The architecture of poverty decides the trajectory of the narrative.
I absolutely agree. The environment makes the story legible, but that demonstrates the power of logistics, not semiotic primacy. Consider the triatomine bug, the vector for Chagas. It flourishes in the architecture of poverty, in the cracks of adobe stacks, palm roofs. Control succeeded precisely where walls and habits changed. This shows that structural editing, altering the literal environment, sanitation, it halts the narrative spread by eliminating the habitat. The core variables are moisture, temperature, construction materials. That's logistics, not metaphor.
But they're logistics as metaphor, logistics as operational structures. The parasite practices co-individuation as form. The question is whether we accept that the semiotic layer is integral to the functional operation of the disease.
And the problem I have with prioritizing that semiotic layer is that the insistence that the parasite is a co-author often risks, aestheticizing genuine harm. Think about the trematode life cycle described as a Baroque sequence. You're right, the Codex calls the cercaria a muscular morpheme. However, this cascade of transformations requires precise biochemical specificity and material passage, translating one form into another matter. Snail flesh, water, a leaf, a bronchus. The specificity of what matter is consumed and where it transforms matters immensely for clinical outcomes, which these non-specific glyphs can sometimes abstract away.
That's a compelling argument about material constraints, but if you considered that the material specificity is the xenopoem, The framework gives us language to describe how the parasite inscribes its form in both the tissue of the host and the metaphysics of the symbolic. Look at the tachyzoite in Toxoplasma gondii. It's not just an invader. It is defined as a sporozoitic ulcer. Its purpose is to be a lesion, a self-writing wound. The movement of a parasite like Babesia is described as a recursive decision. It spins because it cannot choose a grammar. The physical body of the parasite, its form, is the xenopoem. The biological function is inseparable from the textual function.
I understand the elegance of linking form and function there, I do. But the clinical resolution still depends on that material passage being stopped. The Schistosoma stacaria detaches its tail when it penetrates the skin, an adjectival amputation, which is a great literary phrase. But the biological fact is that the parasite undergoes a literal, irreversible morphological change to survive in the blood. The material constraints of the host dictate the shape and action of the agent, even if the codex then rereads that action as a Xenopoetic glyph. The specific material passage is the truth filter.
And the operational framework is the grammar that makes that filter legible. The Xenopoetic Codex forces us to recognize that biology is itself a technology of form. By revealing things like the mycorrhizomatic co-individuation and the placental logic processor, the framework defines life not as a sealed entity, but as a constant management of boundaries. The body is a continuous, vulnerable text.
And while the Codex provides the anatomical facts for a powerful poetic, the ultimate resolution of pathological events remains determined by material constraints. The diagnosis is always a literary technology that must find evidence which is always medium-bound. We have to use this lexicon to sharpen our critique of the supply chain of meaning that is also the supply chain of disease. But we can't forget the material reality that anchors that chain.
The value, then, is precisely in that enduring tension between the conceptual and the corporeal.
Precisely. The tension between the diagrammatic logic and the messy materiality of infection. It leaves the listener, much like the susceptible host, to determine the degree to which they are rewritten by the parasite's mucosemiotic glyphs. It forces us to ask, is this the key to unlocking new biological realities, or is it just the most intellectually rigorous way to talk about the ones we already inhabit?